What's going on, guys? This is Hasan Piker, and we're unveiling a new segment right now where I get to interview some of my favorite artists, some creatives, some brilliant people, and talk to them about political and social issues. Specifically for the first episode, we brought in Chromeo, the funk legend from Canada. We talked about Canadian socialism, and even the good Dr. Jordan Peterson, and much more. So check out In Studio with Chromeo now. What's going on, everybody? We have a really special episode today. We have the Montreal funk legends, Dave One Macklovitch and Patrick P-Thug Gemayel, the duo that is also more popularly known as Chromeo, here in the studio. We're going to talk about a variety of different things: identity, background, Canadian socialism, Canadian doctors that are very famous on the internet. It's going to be an awesome show. Let's get started immediately. I'm very excited. I'm a huge fan of you guys, and also we have a lot of mutual friends and followers on Twitter and that Twitterverse. And what did you call it? The woke Twitterati?
Yes.
Earlier?
Yes.
Who do you think brought people together? Because I think I want to give a little platforming here to Aisha Siddiqui.
Yeah,
she's
I think
dope.
she was like a good, like about almost 10 years ago I started following her, and then through her, other
Damn.
people.
Technically, 10 years ago, I think she was like probably 16. If she was still like future casting or trend setting at the age of 16, which
Or maybe it wasn't
I don't
10 years.
doubt
Maybe
it.
8 years ago.
7,
Yeah, but still, she's a genius. Like
Yeah.
she's like a underground, undercover genius. I think she's awesome. But yeah, everybody kind of knows one another.
Right.
But it's probably like Antifa socialist propaganda, I assume. Like we all get together and we think up of different ways to own conservatives. Just kidding. But let's talk about your background. So you want to start off, Dave, just to give us a little briefer, because
Yep.
as you can see, they're fashion icons, they're music legends, and we're lucky to have them in the studio.
No,
But
we're lucky to be here. We wanted to be here. I am born in Montreal, Canada. My mother is born and raised in Morocco. She's a Moroccan Jew. She immigrated to Canada in the 60s. My father is born in Montreal. His family's from Eastern Europe. Grandma's from Poland and that kind of the old world. And yeah, I mean, a Moroccan Sephardi and an Ashkenazi Jew marrying in those days was very controversial. It was like it actually considered an interracial marriage. So it was crazy. Like the stuff my grandparents used to say to each other and stuff. But we grew up in a French-speaking household at a time where the fight for Quebec independence was sort of had a very xenophobic undertones. So already there was some weird identity stuff growing up. But yeah, so that's my background.
What about you, Pete?
So I'm born in Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon, during the civil war that had started in '75. And my father is Lebanese. My mother is Egyptian, Italian.
Lebanese Christian, right, Pete?
Lebanese Maronite, yes.
Yeah.
So I grew up there most of my childhood until 6, 7 years old. Moved to Egypt for 2 years with my grandparents to get away from the war. That was the first step. And then we moved to Canada when I was about 8 years old.
How did you guys meet?
We met at a French lycée where in Montreal, where a lot of people from former French colonies send their kids because they have sort of a distrust of the French-Canadian
system and language. It's mostly about the language.
The accent, because the local, French-Canadian accent is kind of like alienating to these people who grew up speaking, post-colonial French.
Yeah.
So they send their kids to a French lycée where it's all French professors and the French curriculum.
Yeah, but also me as a Lebanese kid, I would go to French school in Lebanon. That's how I started, and for me and my parents, it just made more sense to
continuation.
Continuation. Yeah.
So you guys come from this crazy melting pot of identity and background, and you guys grew up a little political, right? I feel like, how would you describe what your political identity is, if you don't mind me asking?
My dad, I come from a pretty overtly political family. My dad is a linguist, and he studied Chomsky linguistics in the 70s.
Incredible.
So in that time, obviously for my parents growing up, Foucault on the French side and Chomsky on the Anglo-Saxon side, those were just like they were heroes. Those were their idols. And when you were a linguist and you were doing Chomsky linguistics, naturally you would follow Chomsky politics as well. So I guess I grew up in an openly socialist family. The word socialism was never tarnished in growing up for us, partly because we lived in Canada as well. And Canada has a socialist party. But the NDP in Canada is actually, it's officially a socialist party. And to make things even more complicated, Quebec, which is like our province, right? So the Quebec Separatist Party also built itself a socialist party because of the like xenophobic undertones. We had like ambivalence towards it because we were French. Like this is the thing between Patrick and I that's in common. One of the many things that are in common is we identify as French Canadians, but when we were both growing up, there was tremendous xenophobia associated with the French Canadian nationalist independentist movement. So we didn't know where to belong, kind of.
Right. Yeah. I mean, also as an immigrant, you don't quite know where you belong when you move into a country and you're just like, okay, which kids do I hang out with?
Yeah.
Like, who's gonna take me in? And all of a sudden, that's sort of how you form your identity. Coming into Canada at 8 years old, you're just like, okay, I guess I'm gonna listen to hip hop because this is, what I identify with.
What did you guys like in the realm of hip hop? Oh, but before we get to that, actually, what would you describe your political stance as?
My family's, going through a war, the stances are a bit different.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
You look at politics in a different way. And it's much less scholar, and it's more like I'd call it gut politics.
Yeah.
So my grandfather was always the guy, I don't like this guy, I think he's a bad guy. No. It's just gut politics because they've seen so much stuff and so much corruption and so much that there's a point where you kind of lose the scholar aspect.
You mean the academic?
The academic aspect of politics, and you're just like, man, like, I've seen bad people on both sides, so now I'm just gonna trust my instinct.
But you're also he's from a very prestigious political family in Lebanon. They're Gemayels.
Oh.
Yeah, so basically two of the Kennedys of Lebanon basically were the Gemayels.
Well, I'm glad you guys survived, unlike the Kennedys.
Yeah.
So.
The movie Waltz with Bashir, it's like
that's
about your great uncle? Is that what it is?
It's my cousin, my father's second or third degree cousin.
Oh, damn.
Good enough.
Yeah, it's good enough.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome.
So it's deep.
Yeah.
So, but on top of that,
even then, those politics were run just gut instinct. It's
don't give it away, dude. You're
like,
Lebanon, they didn't know
so
they were just
crazy,
running
right?
it on gut instinct.
Because Lebanon's like proxy politics for the whole Middle East. It's like a microcosm of all the proxy little.
So many different factions, so many religious backgrounds. All
it's more about there's like 17 different religions represented in the Lebanese house. So you have to learn more about coexistence than actual politics.
Yeah, and then you throw like Western influence on top of that as well,
exactly.
and the history of colonialism, and then you have Lebanon, and I guess other regions in Northern Africa. But let's move on to music a little bit because you guys are obviously musicians. So, what were your influences growing up as far as music?
We were hip hop kids, and we met in high school. At that French lycée, and then we discovered like funk music together, which to us was like the archaeology of hip hop because it had all the samples.
Yeah.
That's literally how we, in our generation, how we discovered it. So that's how we kind of became fascinated by funk music because it felt like the archaeology of hip hop music, and we became funk nerds. And eventually, through different projects and so on, we started Chromeo at a time where we felt like we were sort of like rehabilitating this 80s music that most people thought was just tacky and funny. Yeah. And it took us a while to kind of almost give it credence because people thought we were being ironic. And we ride that fine line, whereas our music has a pretty heavy sense of humor, but it's also very self-aware, but it's also very, very earnest and honest. We're two music fanatics. We just want to, we kind of came up under the Beastie Boys, where you could be self-aware, funny, serious, credible, and satirical, and also
Rap about cheese.
but also be taken seriously and have like the most cred in all of and the respect, you know. So we always kind of wanted to write that ambiguous line, and here we are, 15 years later. It's almost 15 years.
Yeah. All right. Well, now I want to make a hard pivot from music to something that's been going on, because we talked a little bit on the phone about this. Like, one of the more pressing issues that at least boggles my mind is the treatment of Palestinians in the hands of the Israeli state. Basically, currently a sovereign state in the Gaza region, and there's an open air prison. It seems like it's an open air prison, and I wanted to hear your backgrounds as people who are from Jewish faith and a Jewish upbringing in Canada, like what you potentially think about what's going on there.
I couldn't disagree and disassociate more with Netanyahu's Israel. I am staunchly in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, and I'm very vocal about it on social media. For me, as a Jew, it's important to show that there are moderate Jews who are not Zionists, and who actually believe even more philosophically. There's a philosopher called George Steiner, a French philosopher called George Steiner, who believes that sort of the metaphysical destiny of Jewish people is forever to be wanderers, and that even the question of a homeland for Jews is problematic and maybe not necessary. That might offend some of my family who lives in Israel, or people who write me on Instagram who live in Israel, but I have really constructive conversations with them. I think for me, you know, as a very, 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 very left-leaning Jew, first of all, a religious state, and we can talk about that with Turkey as well, right? A religious state doesn't make any sense to me.
For sure.
Right, so then already that Israel's a problem. And obviously the occupation, the progressive occupation of Palestine, the blockades, checkpoints, more importantly, the settlements, to me are just like, they're infringements on human rights and on any kind of like moral and political conduct that I stand for. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I feel that. And that area is supposed to, again, almost similar to Lebanon. It's supposed to be symbiosis of different cultures, different religious backgrounds.
Yeah, but the difference is that it wasn't a natural symbiosis.
Yeah.
True.
Lebanon was not constructed. Lebanon came around. The Christians have been there since Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so were the Muslims, so were the Druses, so were, you know, the 17 different communities in Lebanon. They grew up together instead of being implanted, moved others aside 50, 70 years ago, and then they've never had to deal with such a hard rupture. Like,
and my mom being from Morocco,
same in Morocco.
Like Jews and Arabs lived in harmony. You know, my mother speaks Arabic. Her family growing up was extremely imbued with Arabic traditions. And so I guess both our parents come from countries where there was more of a syncretism and like kind of a coexistence of cultures.
Yeah.
So obviously the clashes that we see in Israel are very hard for us to accept.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're a bunch of globalists here. So, I mean, that's where I'm at least. Like, I grew up in Turkey, which is the offshoot of an imperialist power, obviously the Ottoman Empire. But I grew up with not really understanding hard lines surrounding identity, because we don't necessarily have that. It's definitely more of a homogenous, or not a homogenous, how do I describe this? It's definitely a melting pot that has been rather successful. Obviously, there's still oppressed minorities within Turkey, like the Kurds, but
most people, I think, identify as Turkish.
Yeah, exactly.
Before they identify as
and there's no colorism
Muslim,
either, which is very interesting. And I think that colorism is largely an aspect of Western influence or colonialization in these areas like Latin America and in Africa. So we don't have any of that. So I can dream, and I'm assuming just like you guys can dream of a future where these two sects can live peacefully and coexist. But currently, you briefly mentioned Netanyahu. I think under Netanyahu, Israel's stance has become increasingly more militant, and I think it's a
Belligerent.
problem that and I think that's a problem that extends far beyond just Netanyahu. Now, I mean, all of the people that Netanyahu is appointed into positions of power are also war hawks, and they are also militant. And then on top of that, there's a more conservative, there's a more vocal, nationalistic, conservative right wing that's coming into power. And I fear that in the aftermath of Netanyahu, who may or may not go to prison for corruption, we might have an increasingly more militant Israel.
Yeah, there's a New Yorker piece that came out a couple of years ago about that, and what's disturbing about it is that there's a generational turnover in Israel where you have basically people who grew up without the idea and the ideal of peace as something in the horizon. If you're in your 20s right now, that was never even in the cards. You grew up with the Intifada, you know, and so it's not even like a distant dream. Whereas people, you know, of our parents' generation, they have this kind of golden, idealistic, golden era of Middle Eastern politics that they can sort of dream of going back to somehow, or of reviving somehow. But if you're too young to remember that,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I never knew Lebanon not at war. I've never seen that country not at war. Yeah. So I kind of identify with these kids growing up in Israel and not having ever seen it at peace.
Yeah, and it's harder for them to imagine any kind of solution.
But let's talk about potentially America's involvement and influence over what's happening there as well. I mean, because we've seen over the past, I would say, decade that I've lived here, because I've only been living in America for the past 8 years, almost 10 years.
So we all face the same criticism, right? Because like when people when there's pushback against us speaking out, it's always like, well, you're not from here.
Yeah.
You've only been here for 10 years. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
You're in the same boat as us for that.
Exactly. And well, you guys are also like, you have French accents, you're from Canada, so then you're written off immediately. At least I don't have like a Turkish accent. So people at first are like, wait a minute, Hasan, that doesn't sound like what you look like. I don't know about that, but yeah, usually it's like, go back to your country, you know, white power, that sort of basic stuff. But what I was going to say is the American involvement in what's happening in Israel has also been significant. The reason why I want to talk about that is because, are you guys familiar with Ocasio-Cortez?
Yes. Yeah.
So first, let's talk about her victory and potentially socialism having a resurgence in America and like socialist principles, not necessarily like full tilt communism as someone may.
Not at all.
A lot of people might think.
Not at all full tilt communism.
Yeah. But in America, especially because of the Red Scare, like people can't differentiate between socialist principles, a mixed economy, and like full tilt authoritarian, totalitarian communism.
Where, ironically, north of the border, there's an example.
I know.
of a functional social democracy.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? Before we even talk about Cortez, I actually want to ask you guys something, because I've seen a lot of everyone I meet from Canada is usually super nice. I know that's a stereotype, but like it's kind of, for me and for a lot of Americans, it's like kind of true, where everyone is very polite in comparison to Americans, right? I don't know if that means that they're nice, but they're definitely more polite, especially more polite than like people from New York. What I was gonna say is, but then there's always the other side of things where they have like really fascist-leaning political commentators they're just, I feel like it's a hotbed for that.
Well,
Canada.
Stephen Harper. Before
before Peterson, Stephen
before
Harper,
Trump, Stephen Harper. He was our nightmare.
Yeah, and then you have pundits like, but I'm talking like white nationalists.
Oh, what's homegirl's name?
Lauren Southern. Yeah. I think Faith Goldie is from Canada as well. These are all like people who originally propped up as like libertarians. Yeah. American libertarians, even though they were Canadian, and then they decided like, screw the whole libertarian thing. We're fascists now.
I feel like that's the case for a lot of people who use the term libertarian. That's why that term's a slippery slope.
Either you go from libertarianism to like socialism, and you make a full a full 180 shift in your perspective, where you go from libertarianism to anarcho-capitalism to inevitably fascist leanings, inevitably to like an ethno-state. I don't know why that happens, but But yeah, what's up with that? Why is Canadian politics so extreme? With every example that we've seen, it's like either people who believe in socialist principles, or then you have, on the other hand, you have people who are like, no, we should have a white-only state. I'm gonna go to South Africa to make a documentary about white genocide.
Yeah.
What is
Canada's
that?
plural too, though, right? Because like a lot of those people are from the western part of Canada.
Yeah.
And for instance, the province of Alberta has had a history of way more right-leaning politics. It's also like an extremely rich. It's sort of like they call it the Texas of Canada. It's an
exactly what it
oil-rich.
is.
It's an oil-rich province, aka state, American equivalents. And on the western side, there's been, and also there's a wealth inequality in Canada where a lot of the western provinces felt like they were paying the bills for the eastern side, Quebec, the Maritimes, and we in Quebec have the cultural specificity, we're French, but it's a super poor province. So those are the internal dynamics that I think contributed to give rise to like this Canadian right-wing thing. How it got mixed into identity politics, we weren't privy to that brand of it, at least, right?
No, yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, they're all doing. Everyone's doing the same brand of identity politics. It's just
flattened by social media.
Yeah.
Right. Sort of like homogenized by social.
Yeah. Normalized and homogenized. Yeah.
not only normalized, but yes, like there's no nuance to it. Like all of the nuance is completely gone. It's just if you're white, you're right, or usually on the other side, when people criticize like any sort of progressive form of identity politics, it's like, oh, you must hate white people then. You just want one of the strangest things that I've always seen with Black Lives Matter, like anti-Black Lives Matter protests, is like they always claim that it's inherently racist. It's just reverse racist against white people for some weird reason. I've never understood that when it's identifying a problem that impacts all Americans.
Like we used to say, it's a systemic problem.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you know, Ava's documentary, you know, it talks about a systemic, institutionalized problem.
Yeah, exactly. But since we're on the subject of identity politics, let's talk about at least my favorite identity politician. Not a politician, but my favorite doctor, the good Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, who does IDPOL for white horny boys, aka incels.
He is the incel spokesperson.
He is.
He's the incel intellectual.
Yeah, he's the intellectual of incels. He intellectualizes a lot of the pickup artist community, red pill stuff,
right?
Which is filled, ironically, with a lot of pseudoscience, even though he himself is a respected, until recently at least, respected clinical research psychologist.
With chapters in his book such as you should pet a cat when you see one on the street, keep your back straight, and let your children skateboard.
So you're referring, you jumped immediately into 12 Rules.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan Peterson. It's a New York Times bestseller.
Yep.
I wanted to get your perspective, specifically, Dave, because you were a college professor at some point in your life. But I mean, this was before the whole, this was before like social justice warrior concepts kind of took, kind of exploded on college campus, I feel like, because I graduated in 2013.
You were in the mix.
I graduated in 2013 from Rutgers, and I felt like I was at the precipice of all of it. I totally missed it, though.
You missed it.
Yeah, even I missed it.
When I was at Columbia and Barnard, obviously, at Barnard, there was some pretty significant identity politics there. At Columbia, when I was there, which is literally like from 2002 to 2008, nothing that I saw sort of disturbed my worldview. You know, it was all pretty tame. But then again, I was reading The Human Stain by Philip Roth, which is incredible. It's like a book about a Jewish academic who we learn was black and spent his whole life passing himself for a Jew, and he teaches on an American campus. So anyways, I was talking about that with Ezra, and maybe identity politics have been a fixture on American campuses for longer than we can remember. So maybe it comes in waves. It probably did, because like we.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a weird way, Jordan Peterson does identify genuine criticisms of the left. And I don't think the left is above criticism. I think we do deserve criticism, specifically in regards to certain things that we do that could be deemed as anti-free speech, that get in the way of building a robust coalition against what a lot of people have correctly identified as the resurgence of fascist principles here in America and worldwide in the form of nationalistic movements. So we're having a hard time garnering as much support as possible, and I think that if people on the left were more critical of some of the things that we're doing, then we could potentially have a stronger coalition. But I feel like someone like Jordan Peterson, who is very obviously a social conservative, who analyzes everything from a Jungian, Christian traditionalist perspective, who self-admits to being a social conservative. Usually is criticizing the left to disparage and vilify every form of collective action, which, again, he has mentioned multiple times. You just have to kind of sift through the 17 hours of lectures before you finally arrive at the meat where he does give it away.
Yeah, because there's a lot of slogans, too, because there's this whole self-help thing as well. That's like the carrot that lures people in.
Exactly. And to me, like, I don't personally think Jordan Peterson is the worst person on the right, as a lot of people. But I think like some of the criticisms that he gets may be even a little overblown. But I think it stems from the fact that, just like you mentioned, the whole self-help thing and the fact that he hides his ideological background makes him seem as though he is looking for objective truth. He's only preaching the objective truth. He doesn't have any sort of political ideology that he's guided by.
And then as soon as you go, well, what is objective truth? What are you talking about? Then he says you're a postmodernist. And then because he's got this whole like anti-postmodern, he talks about postmodern fascism. So any kind of like things are relative, truth is in flux, blah, blah, blah. No, that's a no.
Yeah.
And it makes no sense because his conceptions, a lot of his tenets are based on like these crazy binaries, where like he'll spend hours talking about men versus women, relationships between men and women, and they're based
and relationships between alpha males and the rest of us.
Who
can't get all the females, so we should redistribute the female population. Like
that's incel right there.
That's
intellectualized incel.
Are you guys familiar with pickup artist stuff at all, or like the red pill community? No, because
a little bit, marginally. Red pill community, yes.
Yeah, so like the red pill community kind of started off with all of these PUA blogs originally that were feeding you the red pill, the truth about women, and like female hypergamy was one of them, which is this idea that women always want to level up. I'm giving like a very primitive analysis of it, but women always want to level up. They're always looking for a better partner. So men constantly strive to impress women, and that's why we've built these phallic skyscrapers and whatnot. It's like somewhat pseudoscientific, but I see the reason, the basis for which that you derive these ideas from. But then on top of that, there's the 2080 theory, which is I think it's an economic principle or something, where that they've applied to distribution of sex. 20% of the guys have sex with 80% of the girls, so then the 80% of guys are just left out in the dust.
That's incel.
These are exactly
incel 101.
He's like indirectly suggesting that we redistribute the resource of women to all men, which is insane.
Yes.
Like when you dissect it, it's insane.
Yeah, and
sexually frustrated phallocrats.
Yeah, but it's great that we're in a period where this guy can come out and we can identify him.
Yeah,
this guy is coming out of McGill and Harvard.
University of Toronto.
Harvard has some of the worst academics, if you ask me. There's a lot of professors at Harvard.
If he didn't have the platform to speak out for us to identify him, he would be a respected scholar,
He's a great rhetorician, and he that's what I low-key admire in people like him and Milo.
I was just gonna say that, yeah. They're very skilled communicators.
Incredibly skilled communicators.
They're like performing. It's like theater. They're very good at it.
Well, Milo would love to say that what he does is performance art.
Yeah.
Right? He would hide under that.
Yeah.
But I studied rhetoric in my grad school, and I admire, when I watch Milo Q&As, like I want, my blood boils and I want to die, but the guy can cook up a zinger.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
100%.
That's the thing with rhetoric. Like rhetoric
it's
has
an
to be
art.
with but it has to be with a conscious,
Ideally, well, not in a
you can-
pre-Socratic way. I wish there was someone on the left who was
was as
as sort of
Adept and
virally
yeah.
eloquent,
Yeah.
let's say, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I'm trying. It's not
Yeah.
working, you guys.
No,
I'm not gonna lie.
It is.
No,
it
no.
is.
So,
it is. That's why we.
Yeah.
I don't like, that's why we like you.
Responsible.
No, I like there is definitely this.
No, but
what
you're
even
it.
what
You're
you
close
said-
to it.
Oh well, thank you. I don't
Yeah.
think so, but
On your
what
way.
you just mentioned about even analyzing someone like Milo and being able to see their strengths and
Yes.
analyzing someone like that's the way I grew up. I analyzed all of these people who I thought were successful, especially in American political discourse. I looked at Steve Bannon.
Yeah.
Once he came to the forefront of political discourse, Milo Yiannopoulos. As soon as I caught wind of him and Jordan Peterson now, and I think that we should be able to kind of study what they're doing because there are elements that make them very successful. Most importantly, they're very skilled communicators, and then the other thing is they identify anxieties. Jordan Peterson is incredible at identifying the frustrations of many individuals. Obviously, that's the reason why he's been able to captivate millions of people.
And so, sorry to cut you,
Yeah,
but
no.
imagine if there was someone. I mean, there might be, and I just haven't come across the person. But imagine if there was someone who was able to identify the anxieties of the American working class that voted for Trump in all the swing states.
Yeah.
Right. And to identify and to pinpoint what their concerns are and what their it's even worse than anxieties, like neuroses almost,
Yeah.
and traumas,
insecurities. That's-
traumas.
That's manipulation, though.
I don't know. I call it politics, but you
It-
pinpoint those anxieties, and you make a compelling, nowadays viral compatible
Yeah.
performance and argument and discourse around it, and then the left will have would have a chance to sway these people back.
Yeah, but we also in America, especially, we have levers and power set in place in order to continue down the same trajectory that we're going. On the left specifically, the Democratic Party is an institution that is far too powerful, that is completely given up on leftist principles. There was I guess like McGovern is like one of the or Ralph Nader, but he ran as independent. Like we had certain, we had certain political figures that prop up every 10 years or so that immediately get squashed by the democratic institution, and it's been incredibly difficult to push for more progressive messaging, especially from a fiscal perspective, because like fiscal, so many people that I know in America are quick to say, "Oh, I'm socially progressive, but I'm fiscally conservative."
There was a meme about that last week.
Yeah.
You said,
I know.
I was gonna
you say it.
repost it. They drive me nuts.
Yeah.
That thing drives me nuts. Or like, what is it?
It's like, oh, you hate the problems that are created, but you also don't mind the reason why those problems are in place.
Or in
I butchered
European,
it, but-
no, but that's what it is. Or in European parlance, it's I'm economically liberal and socially liberal.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, liberal. Yeah, because liberalism
Liberal in
is
European-
like completely different in European terms.
liberal
yeah.
in Europe meaning capitalist,
Yeah,
but
capitalist.
also sort of like the Economist rides that line.
Yeah.
Where for them the free market solves everybody's problems, but also they have this kind of like pseudo open-minded liberal in American sense political slant.
Yeah.
I don't, like you say, I don't think the two can be compatible nowadays.
Yeah, no, it's the tech world is actually a pretty good place to identify that, because they're like, oh yeah, no, if you're
100%.
trans, gay, black, white, doesn't matter, come through. We will use you as serfs, basically. Like we'll create a tech serfdom. It's just more labor for us, so we don't mind. But yeah, look at how open-minded we are as we exploit everyone around us. Deflate wages as best as we possibly can and create an environment that is inhospitable for people that are making over $250,000 a year. I'm referring specifically to San Francisco and the homelessness issue there, and like how terrifying the demographics are over there, like how that demographic change has been so rapid and so significant.
$80,000 a year.
Yeah.
So $80,000 a year or something. I saw a crazy stat that $80,000 a year was low income now.
100%. I think it's like the median is $170,000.
That's insane.
And people look at that and think like, this is good. Like people look at that and think like, oh, well, we have more thousandaires. I think it's the. I'm gonna butcher this quote, but. And we also have to wrap up. We have 5 more minutes left in this, unfortunately, which we're just getting started, and it sucks. I want to do this. I want to do like a longer conversation with you guys for sure. But it's the butchered Steinbeck quote that I love, that I always mention, and it's socialism will never work in America because the people of America don't see themselves as an exploited proletariat, but temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Right.
And obviously, like Great Depression era, it's a paraphrase quote. That's not. He doesn't actually say that. But you know, I love that.
Only in New York is there something that's akin to the French, what they call in France, the caviar left.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, or champagne socialists. Yeah. Exactly. The caviar left. That's hilarious. I love that. Yeah, but I mean, Obama recently gave a speech at the Mandela Foundation, I think, and where he talked about income inequality, which is interesting because I think he exacerbated income inequality in America greatly by taking Bush's tax cuts that were supposed to sunset in his reign and solidifying them, even though he was criticized heavily and not increasing the corporate tax rate or the tax rate for the 1% in any meaningful way. But you know, the elites are talking about it. My understanding is this is like the main conversation at Davos and at these sort of like rich people summits is like, how do we deal with these very poor people that we're making even more poor by hoarding all of the wealth and resources?
That's the Thomas Piketty book.
I have no idea. What is it called?
It's I'll give you the reference after, but it's this French economist who wrote that about the sort of growing inequality gap between the uber rich and the extremely disenfranchised. But I think to go back to one thing that you were talking about before, and when we talk about those like alt-right or neo-right-wing figures that we sort of low-key not admire, but like when we try to spy on their techniques and kind of like respect some parts of their communication strategies, I think a lot of the socialist awareness in America, that shift can come through culture, which is another Bannon tenet. He's the first one who's
Culture's
like,
downstream of politics.
There you go.
He's right, 100%.
Yeah, and so I think the shift can happen to the left's advantage with a lot of stuff that you guys do, actually. Yeah, that's why we wanted to come here.
Yeah, that's what we're trying. We're trying to be a good gateway into opening people's minds about like certain realities revolving the economic system that we're living under.
But through a contemporary cultural dialogue.
Yes.
And a millennial friendly.
Not like Democracy Now! Is what you're saying, which is great. I love Amy Goodman, but like Democracy Now! Is viewed by what, like 4 people? Yeah. Like four like communist Jews living in like Idaho or whatever, or like the only people still giving money to Democracy Now! Unfortunately, this was incredible. Thank you guys so much for coming in. I hope we can do a longer conversation down the line because this wasn't enough for me. I don't know if it was enough for you guys.
We didn't get to Sacha Baron Cohen.
You didn't get to Sacha Baron Cohen.
Oh shit, you're right. All right, well, check out Head Over Heels, Chromeo's 5th studio LP. They're incredible, and I hope you guys had a great time. Is there anything else that you guys want to say?
No, this is great. It's great. We're content.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Never miss another breakdown video by ringing the bell below. You'll get notified whenever we publish something new. Also, don't forget to join TYT today. Download our TYT Plus app on your phone or head on over to tyt.com/join.